The record button.
Okay, you're 5 steps ahead as
Perfect
usual.
segue.
Yeah, thanks. As we talked a little bit already, this is called User Experience and Enterprise Agility, and my name's Adam Deardurff. I also work for Insight. I'm one of the UX leads, and my background is really in the research and strategy side, though I do some UX design. I'm going to skip the Menti since we already kind of did introductions and we know where each other is from and what the skills we have on the call are. Like I said, I work for Insight. I've been in digital for around 15 years. I have 2 girls, a 5 and a 3-year-old, which has taken up most of my pandemic life. In addition, I've tried to pick up some new hobbies like golfing and woodworking, which I'm still failing at miserably, but I try really hard. And then I am a pianist. That was what I went to school for, and I did not do any schooling, at least formal schooling for UX. I kind of stumbled into the occupation and learned it all on my own. So for all of you that are transitioning into UX roles, there's so much good content out there now, way more than when I started in the field, and I'd say there's a lot of opportunity. So keep going. So from my piano days, I did play in a band for a while, and this was actually one of the pictures taken at my first agency that I worked at. I'm the guy in the funny glasses with the keyboards. And when I got into agency world, everything we did was so cool to me, and working with a team of people to create something and bring a product to life, that was something that I really glommed onto and jumped into UX and the process and everything that came with it. And what I did there was really upfront in the process. And we were big on the 5Ds, as we called them. And it was our proprietary process. And that was the thing that made us great. And that was what we sold to clients. And uh, as you see the 5Ds, you might notice it feels very waterfall. And it was. And the proprietary process wasn't so proprietary, as I learned later. It's that there are different stages, but what you call them doesn't really matter. The process is still waterfall. And just for a little fun, it typically went something like this. So we would have a meeting at the beginning of the year, and the the new business person would be, I sold our client a new website that needs to go live by August 1st. And then the UX researcher would be, awesome, we have light years. What does it need to do? They sell widgets. But what kind of widgets? Who buys these widgets? We have our process to figure it out. And we relied heavily on that process. So after we did our research, we went back and we talked to the UX architect and said, we've learned everything we can from the client. We need to create a site for selling car widgets to mechanics. And the UX architect would be, awesome, how is their product catalog structured? I had to sacrifice a lot, but I got us a print catalog. Amazing. I'll redo everything to make it more intuitive. And so you'd be off on the structural journey of architecting everything, not to undermine the complexity of the work that a lot of UX architects do, but it's another step in the process. And then the UX architect would hand it off to the designer and say, I have a new sitemap and wireframes, and this will change everything. And the designer would say, do we have brand guidelines? I need to get the creative juices flowing. And so we'd bring back the brand assets, but don't hold back. And don't worry, we'll knock their socks off. And a month later, you'd be like, I'm ready to start building, says the developer. Well, I have an inspiration board, but I don't like where it is. Okay, let me know when I can get started. Great. And it's funny, and I'm not meaning to make fun of the people in the process, but the idea that we're waiting, the development team is waiting, people are waiting 3 months since we first said there's a problem that needs solved, and now we're into May 1st, and we have concepts, and we're ready to develop, and we're ready to show them. We get all excited, and then the client says, this isn't exactly what we had in mind. And we're stuck and say, we're supposed to start developing here. And through this whole process, it takes so long to get through um, that you're never actually developing value. And so we end up going through steps and steps and steps in the process. And really, we have a process that is focused on outputs and documentation and not actually producing value and outcomes. And what I learned as I thought through it and as I've kind of iterated with other teams is that it was set up to be a production line, that there were lots of checks and balances in the process, lots of red tape, lots of specialization and skills to say, you get this, then you get this, then you get this, and you're going to crank out as many outputs of your thing as you can. And there wasn't really a sense of ownership. If you talk to any of these people and you ask them if they are invested in the product that they're working on, I would guess they probably said no. But when you have agility, that's something that we can change. And so when I came to Insight, there was a close partnership with Scrum.org, and everyone that comes through the door goes through Scrum training. And it was really revolutionary for me in terms of how things should work and how teams were cross-functional and how everyone was marching towards the same goal every sprint. And I naturally thought, this is amazing. Everything's going to be roses and rainbows when I get into the client. And what I found out was that's not actually the case. I started working at clients and found that there are lots of ways that UX is folded into enterprise agility that doesn't work. For example, the business-driven UX. So products that get built that if you ask a user, they say, I don't really need that product. And there may not be a UX person at all tied to that product, but it's a good idea that someone thought they had. And so a team works on it a long time, brings it to market, and then all of a sudden it disappears. Like the Amazon Dash button, or I have an Amazon wand. If you remember those, they were like magnetic. They stick to your fridge and you could scan things with them. It was actually pretty cool, but they discontinued them pretty shortly afterwards. You have development-driven UX. So this is probably where we see a lot of our enterprise tools is that a lot of the design and the decisions are made by developers who are just trying to get something built, and they work. A lot of hard work, a lot of intelligence goes into what they build, but they're not really always that usable. We had one client that we were working with that the rule of thumb was it takes a year for you to get up to run on our mainframe system before you're comfortable working every day in it. And for a lot of people now that are used to smartphones and more intuitive interfaces, and especially in the past 2 years having to do everything online, um, this isn't as acceptable as it was back in the day. One of my favorites, that after the fact UX, or make it pretty. So when someone brings you a product that's 90% done and says, hey, can you make this look better? And you're like, well, where are you in the development process? And I'm like, well, we're done. We just need to apply these brand guidelines. Or the magic wand UX. There's a story here of a product that we got. It was actually a data dashboard, and they had spent, I think, 9 months working on it. And the team came to us and said, we'd love to do some usability testing on this. And we asked who the UX designer was, and they said, well, we didn't have one. And we asked, well, do you have user tasks or scenarios, or did you do any research leading up to it? And they said, no, our product owners, they know what the users want. And we did the user research, and they said, well, they're 2 weeks before we launch, and it was all wrong. The users couldn't find what they were looking for. The things that were on the first level dashboard were only applicable to 1% of the users, and they had to scrap and redo a lot of their work that cost them a lot of money. And then no UX allowed. And we might as well call this waterfall, but the idea that Agile is for developers and that UX people throw things over the wall and then we're stuck on an island, and what's built after that is that we're at the development team's mercy. And uh, that's unfortunately, a lot of people look that way when they look at the end product of some of those things that they've designed and handed off to development teams, because things change. I think that's the nature of agility, is that we can produce value faster and pivot when we need to. And so when I got there, I ended up having to talk a lot about what user experience isn't, as much as I had to do user experience work and be an evangelist for good user experience, in that it wasn't just based on deliverables. It wasn't based on someone asking for wireframes or a design for this screen or a little bit of usability testing or giving some personas. Um, but really getting them familiar with the idea that user experience encompasses all aspects of the user's interaction and perceptions, and not just of the interface, but of the services of the company, of the customer service, everything around that. And so changing that perspective, um, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. It was always not always, it's an uphill battle sometimes, but it's a great fight. And the idea is that we're shifting our focus away from outputs to outcomes. And when I say that, when I look at the process, the waterfall process, in the way that traditional user experience flow was set up, it was very dependent on those deliverables as value in contributing. Those deliverables are items that contribute to achieving an outcome, aren't really the outcome. It's just one step in the journey. And you can do as much good strategic work, research work, design work as you want, but the final product might not meet the outcome that you're looking for. Um, and so shifting those focus to outcomes is really what the business or the customer needs to achieve from the product you deliver. So when we talk about usability or accessibility or even profitability, those are all outcomes of what we're building. Those have nothing to do with those outputs or the deliverables. And the nature of that comes from, um, especially in the enterprise space, there's a lot of amazing technologists and developers who really want to build the thing right. So they know how to build good products, they know how to code, they know how to innovate with technology, but they never ask themselves, is it the right thing to build? Or they don't understand how to get that feedback, or don't have all of the principles in mind to understand what is right and wrong about the decision, when the font's too small, when there's not enough color contrast, when a process can be eliminated instead of just rewritten. We don't always understand that. So it's important for UX to sit in the middle and say, this is the right thing to build, now go build it. And the idea that we are confronted every day with business problems and we're trying to solve them with technology. 90% of what we're doing, there's a technology solution. Yes, we're working with users and processes and things like that, but we're really sitting in between these two things. And what's the business problem or the outcome we're trying to achieve, and what's the right technology solution? So oftentimes we have to go deeper and ask, is that really the problem that we're trying to solve? So when someone says we need a mobile app, why do they need a mobile app? Is it something that could be solved with a responsive website? And does the user actually want a mobile app? Is it the right technology to use for your customer and for your internal teams? Will we have to retrain our whole organization around a technology just because it's the cool new thing? How do we make that product useful? How do we eliminate processes? And is it ethical? I think coming back to the AI conversation that we had before the presentation started, we have a very unique position that we sit in the future of technology space, where artificial intelligence, machine learning, a lot of the typical things that we're charged with doing when it comes to a visual interface, are going to go away at some level, And there's a lot of space for us to sit in technologies that exist in the ether around us, and also make decisions for us. And we have to be the people that stand up for the user and make sure that what we're doing is right. Put it through the biases filters and say what happens if we do this thing, or if we encourage users to do this over a long period of time. We sit at a very specific intersection, have a very long-term value in technology solving business problems. And it's not just me talking about it. There's research that has a value on user experience and specifically product design and the effect that has on saving money. And the reality of it is UX helps break down complexity. And so the skills that we learn when we're getting trained in UX and when we're learning the best practices are all about breaking down the unknown and the complex. And agility really thrives, in that complicated and complex area. And this is the Stacy diagram, if people aren't familiar with that. But really, there is a space for simple products and simple processes that are repeatable. And I'm not saying waterfall is bad for everything. I'm not saying that Agile is great for everything, and it's dependent on your organization. But UX in Agile has a specific role. So there are a couple approaches that really work best. And the gold standard is one team, including UX. So when we talk about user experience or in an Agile team, or when we talk about a Scrum team, which is what I'm going to use for example, Scrum talks about a team having all of the needs, skills that it needs to produce the product. And UX is one of those cross-functional skills that's super valuable, especially when you're at the beginning stages of a product, in breaking down that complexity and understanding what's the right screen to design, what's the right interaction pattern, are we picking the right technologies? That's really the gold standard, is that UX is part of that team. And over time, if there's not a vision for what that looks like, that UX person might jump to another team. But that's the gold standard. But it's not the reality. The reality is there aren't enough UX people to go around, and in most organizations, there are multiple dev teams that UX person has to support. And that means orbiting multiple teams. And can work effectively, but has a lot of challenges. The UX person really has to double down on not going to Scrum events, which sounds really funny. But the reality is, supporting multiple teams, you need time to work, you need time to participate and stay connected to all of the teams. And if you're in all of the events, then it's going to be impossible to do that. So you have to find more flexible ways of working, but still to be part of those teams within the process and working with them proactively. And then the third model is really working as subject matter experts. So in some organizations, there's a UX team, and they have a bunch of UX designers that orbit the planet Smes, we'll call it. So as subject matter experts, the UX people live there and they share best practices. They might share a design system, and when teams need them, they get deployed to those teams and they work on those teams, or maybe they work on multiple teams. And so this model becomes really effective when you're trying to scale and pivot to complexity within an organization, and make sure that they're all infused, but also centralizing the knowledge, the discipline, and things like that. So you might even have this combination with multiple teams. I should say that we're working with a couple of clients that have this case today. One where we have 3 designers supporting 10 teams, one where we have 1 designer supporting 3 teams, or 1 designer supporting 2 teams, and the ability for us to go in and help shepherd UX as a discipline and make sure they're embedded on the teams has really changed the perspective of those teams in what they think about UX, but also what they learn, and the idea that they're able to, as they work with UX more closely, start to assimilate knowledge and get trained up on UX best practices, and so they're able to make better recommendations as well. And going to work in Scrum, especially for people that were more in agency land where I came from, there were a lot of mindset challenges that started to have to get broken down or that I had to process and make sense of. And the idea that we need layers of approvals to protect us just really isn't true at some level. When you trust your team and you're going through an iterative process and having transparency, you don't need those layers of red tape. And the idea that it has to be polished and we have to show finished products, no, we can show iterative work and we can show work that's not finished to establish direction and make sure we're headed down the right path. The idea that we shouldn't validate with users till it's ready, or discovery is not part of Agile. The research is part of any design process, and it can be just as much as part of Agile as it is any other project. The fact that we're Agile only applies to development, and the fact that we're siloed in disciplines, that people only want to do one thing. I only do research, I only do design. At scale, that might be really possible, and you have a centralized team of research that gets deployed to teams as needed, or design, and you might be able to have those functions, but nothing works better than someone who's embedded in the team and says, well, I can do user interviews and I can design this and I can architect it. So having a cross-functional skill set, even if you aren't deep in all of the areas, becomes really valuable, and something that I think UX schools actually are doing a much better job of teaching than I initially saw. So coming out of this, what are some of the recommendations for UX Smes? So when you're working on multiple teams, as most of us probably are, you're going to want to minimize your involvement in sprints. Like I said before, make sure you're taking time away from the team and staying tapped into them, communicating proactively, and getting pulled into those events when you have things to share or when they have questions of you. Maximizing that partnership with the product owner. For a UX person, that's going to be your primary relationship. When we've pulled or done retros with UX teammates, the meeting that they've said is the most important to them is their one-on-one with their product owner. Inclusive UX, refinement, transparency, the idea that as we're building new things, as we have ideas, as we're iterating on what we're doing, we need to share that refinement with the team and get their input. What, not just the product owner, but developers. We need to be inclusive of our process and not hold that close to us. Ongoing training collaboration becomes really important for yourself and for the teammates, so you can be more cross-functional and so they can be more cross-functional. And the gold standard becomes like when you have someone bring a problem to you and say, hey, here's an interaction pattern that I think would be good, or I fixed this thing for accessibility, and you look at it and you say, that looks great. When you're able to do that and developers start to make good decisions on their own, which they most certainly can do. They have great ideas. They can pick up best practices just like anyone else. That becomes amazing to work in a team where you're not the only one that's holding that quality and accessibility and usability to heart. It is really important for you to define a working agreement, making sure the team knows how and when to engage with you, because you can't get pulled into everything. And then joining those events when complexity hits. Your role in the team is still to help with complexity and questions, and there's nothing better to do that than the visualizations that we can produce as UXers. And I'll say showing value, not documentation, has become a motto of mine. Is How do we get away from justification and just start showing the value and outcomes that we're charged with? And at the end of the day, going back to music metaphors, um, UX and Scrum feels like playing in a jazz band, in where you might be the keyboardist in my circumstance, and there are times when you need to take the lead and you need to design or lead a workshop with your team for refinement or planning. Um, and there are times where you need to just play the rhythm and be doing the backup. You might be pairing with developers or teaching them or doing some card reviews or looking at analytics or research, things like that. It might not be in the forefront of what everyone's doing, um, but everyone has a role, and working together, you're going to play beautiful music. So there's a lot more where this comes from. I'm not going to dig into all of this, but at Insight, we do have a workshop around principles for UX and Scrum, if anyone's ever interested in that. And we have 6 core principles. I'll just show them out right here. But the idea that we can talk more as UX practitioners around how UX and Scrum enhance each other, how to deploy learning and design in every sprint along with delivery, how to right size learning. It's hard to take some of these big research projects and say, we're going to squish this down into something that fits in a sprint. And we're going to do that every sprint. We're going to get user feedback. Or we have to learn this big thing. How do we do that across many sprints? And it's hard to estimate and measure. We're traditionally good at measuring development or how long it takes to produce a design, but how long does it take to learn something is really hard. Inspecting and adapting every sprint, not just the product that you're building, but learning and design. And then complexity and UX needs are related, which I just talked about a little bit. So where do you start? I have a list of a couple things to try, but it really starts with asking yourselves questions about how you can be more inclusive and get everyone working together. And that starts with getting them excited about the customer or the user. Um, and then asking and reflecting on yourself, would my customer be more excited by the artifact or a working design? Like, what are the things that are going to deliver value to the customer? Where should I invest my time? How do I minimize the work I'm doing to drive the team forward and to make decisions? How do I deepen my customer relationship and get feedback so we can have those iterative loops of research? How can I include other people's in the problem solving creative process? So maybe it's not me going away for a month like I showed in the example up front, but maybe we're doing a workshop as a team and coming up with a solution together. And how do I need to grow to be able to provide more to the team? Can I get better at research? Can I understand the business better? Do I need to take a front-end development class so I can understand responsive HTML, CSS, all of those things, and help the team in a different level? And there are other things to practice. I know this is a lot, but I'll just highlight a couple. Build that relationship with the product owners. If you're a product owner or you see a product owner that doesn't have a companion user experience person, find them a friend or reach out to me, and we have plenty of people that we can help on that front. Make assumptions and tests, pair with developers, work fast, throw away work. It's all about moving the team along, delivering value and outcomes that to the business and the users that, again, we'll talk about those outcomes, the usability, accessibility, profitability. There are probably a lot more, but the idea that that's what we're trying to achieve. We aren't trying to make the best looking sitemap that you've ever seen or polish something up, because the moment you create that, most likely it's going to change. And then one of my favorite quotes, like by doing this, we we as UXers can help break down those walls and be mercenaries and bring empathy to the teams and make sure that we're building the right product for people. Because at our core, I would say most, if not all, user experience folks care about people. And don't be a team of mercenaries. Don't be just contract to hire, checking off. I produced my deliverables. I'm done. Like, let's invest together in the outcomes. So, any questions?
I have a question. Do you
Yeah.
still? I feel some returning. Yeah, I don't know if it's my. Yeah. Do you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, it was the first time I was seeing that graph, that technological realization against requirements. I would like to talk a little bit about requirements. What is the role that requirements have in that connection in moving from output to outcomes? You know what?
Mm-hmm.
What are requirements in your practice? I mean, how much do you rely on them? Who defines the requirements? And
Yeah.
if that can be, the key to that process where, everybody meets at the definition of the requirements, so that then everybody can rely on those as a connection between all the research and the design and the development. Yeah.
Great question. The intersection of requirements in this to me is when a UX person and a product owner and a BA are working ahead to define where there's value, what needs built, especially when you're replacing old technology. The idea that you have to understand how the current thing works, what value it's adding. You can't have things fall down as you're replacing something. It's a little easier when it's a new product, but that team of people should be working ahead and saying the business person or the product owner should be driving, here's the business value that we need to target and achieve. And the business analyst typically in the team is working and saying, okay, here are the requirements, the business requirements around what we need to build or what we need to replace. And the UX person is saying, do we need to build it that way? Or what are the alternate ways to build this? Can we eliminate processes? Why do we need that data? And talking to users about the right experience to build. And all of those things come together in the final product. And so at the end of the day, typically you have some kind of prototype that you validated with users that covers off on this thing accomplishes the business needs, it accomplishes the user needs, and it's going to drive the outcomes that we hoped it would. So let's go build it. And those requirements turn into cards in Jira or ADO or whatever you're working in.
Yeah. So I see, I mean, usually requirements are responsibility of the product lead or the product owner, right? Are UX people or researcher involved into defining those, or should they be?
I think so. I think that if you don't have them involved in that, then you're going to, as I say, if you want to rebuild a crappy product, it's still probably a crappy product. um, if you're going to actually do it right, then you need to include the users in the journey to create the product. So you aren't wasting your time and you aren't rebuilding something only to get it out to users and say, this looks better, but I still don't know why I'm doing this, or I still don't know how to do that. Um, so I think there's a balance between what the business has, and sometimes the business says we have to have this because we have a really old system that needs this data point, and maybe we'll just put it in the background because the user doesn't need to see it or something like that.
So how do you balance that discovery time with the fact that the business is trying to move forward and build things and leadership is giving you deadlines, et cetera, et cetera? Because that process you described is fantastic and the ideal, but it does take time and investment from a lot of resources. So just interested to hear how you've handled that.
It's a lot easier when you're focused on one team, I'll say that. Because you do have to, there's like a three-legged stool, and your first charge is, have I done everything the team needs to meet the sprint goal if you're working in Scrum? And then you should be working upstream and downstream. So did the thing we deliver produce the outcome that we want? And is the next thing ready to go? So what do I need to learn? What do I need to design? What do I need to validate? And keeping, like, pivoting between those three tracks is the biggest challenge, I would say, for a UX person. And the hardest thing to manage is when you have someone, you typically from the business side, breathing down your neck, saying something's due at a certain date and time. Like, that's really hard. But we have to, those people need to be our biggest allies and partners, and we need to be just as transparent with them of the right thing to do and the challenges that we see. I won't say it's easy, because it's not, but I do think it's possible, and it's another reason why we need more UX people within these enterprise teams, so we can spread out that discipline. Any other questions?
Adam, you talked about the importance of UX designers creating more than just artifacts, but creating, like, adding value, and, like, don't just create what's better, creating the artifact versus a working design. When you say that, are you more, especially the line about the working design, are you saying that that's more that we should be doing more user research instead of creating artifacts, or is there other work that you see that isn't artifact creation or like user research that's doing the adding value?
So one example I have is of a UX designer that a UX designer that was on a team, and I came in, and what was happening was every sprint he would put together a PowerPoint presentation that had all of the justification for what he was doing, and then at the end he'd show his design, and then he'd fight with the team and say, "Hey, I just put together a 20-page slide deck on why you should believe me."
Okay.
And all they wanted to do was see the design progress and move forward and have that dialogue around, this is a good idea, this is a bad idea, or like, is there a better way to do this? In the time that he spent putting together a 20-page deck of documentation and validation, if he had continued to progress the design or shown a couple of different concepts and move the ball forward for the team, then he would have kind of, you start to co-own the creation of that product, and you aren't left with a paper trail of stuff that gets thrown away. Because most of the time documentation ends up being just grounds for you to fight with other people.
Okay, that makes sense. For that definitely seems like a lot of extra time spent on it's not.
Any other questions or even challenges that you've run across working with UX people? Those are fun conversations to have too.
Not a question, just a comment. I really enjoyed your music metaphors. I studied piano in college too, so that was exciting to hear.
It's funny how music is so prevalent, whether it's musicians or music appreciation or whatever that might be within the UX community. It seems to be high for whatever reason. It's just there a lot. Maybe it's people like playing together, creating together, or whatever that might be.
I have some experience if there is time. I don't know. We are nearly at time, but so I'm an outsider. I'm not a UX design, conventionally, or I'm a researcher mostly. And so in the company where I work, there is this research design kind of dichotomy or binary effort, like where we work together, but we have to balance out our work together. I produced the research at some point, artifacts of the research that I did, and then I shared it with the designer. And they said, okay, now let's work together. What do you need from me in order to do the design, Figma stuff? And it was very hard to build that communication. We didn't have a common language, moving from, word artifact to design, which is visuals kind of. So that one thing. And another one is, he said, I don't like I don't like to design in the vacuum. I want to, before I start doing anything, I want to have a clear idea, because it's a waste of time otherwise, that kind of approach. So it was difficult at that point to build that connection of how should I pass everything I learned during the research to the designer to start. So at that point, then a designer should do the research if there is no communication between the two figures, right? It's this. Can you explain to me how this works in industry or in your experience?
Yeah, the fact that we're in such a people-centric and specialized group, there are people that just do design or just do UX research, and that's okay. We're in a couple different client scenarios. One of them has designers that are distributed to teams, and they have a centralized research group. And so the research gets pulled in every couple sprints to run a study on prototypes or developed products, shares those results, and then the designer's like, and the product owner like, great, we'll take it from here. And the researcher goes back and works with another team. There are other cases, like you said, where whether it's because there's no budget for a researcher or there's no one staffed or whatever that is, that one person has to do everything end to end. And that's really cool when the person can do that and show, like, be that cross-functional teammate. But it's really hard when you're saying that it's their struggle working together on bringing those things to life. Actually, one thing I'll reference is I think it might have been the last talk at this group was object-oriented UX, and the idea that we can create a common language around tangible things, and make it really simple to understand an interface. It doesn't have to be as complicated as we make it, and the interface might get more complicated, but we can start with foundational pieces and objects that make it really easy to understand. So if you take something like like, I'm going to use a bad example, but a fancy football page or an IMDb page, that's probably a better example. When you think about the things that are on that page, there's movies, there's actors, there's movies, people, and something else. And you take those objects and you start breaking down what's in those objects, excuse me. And at the end of the day, you don't have to wait for creative inspiration to start organizing objects on a page. And you can have, if you have the same language around what the objects and actions are, you can have that dialogue. But when we're talking about two different things, that's when it gets really complicated. And we run into that a lot from a consulting company that goes into businesses that work in specialized industries, and you're trying to understand the abbreviations and everyone talks in letters, and you're like, I don't even know what you said or what letters that could be. And so you're trying to use your decoder ring, and if you're able to everyone kind of align on the common nomenclature at the very beginning, it makes it a lot easier. So I just rambled a lot. I'm not sure if I even answered your question, but maybe there was a nugget in there that did.
Yeah, I like the idea of the object-oriented UX, like a kind of a vocabulary for translating. It's a good idea. Don't it might change from context to context, of course, but there is so much there. But yeah, I like that. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, there's a lot of articles, content, talks on YouTube around that. Sophia Prater is fantastic. She actually just came in and did a workshop with our team. So it's also kind of top of mind for me right now. So I'll give her the shameless plug. Any other questions or anything for the people coming into UX that was kind of an aha or something that you're going to take away? Gonna put you on the spot. No?
I guess I was wondering, like, for like a business analyst or something, like, I don't know much about that. I'm a developer. I don't work with any business analysts. Like, I don't know much about that, but like, how did you learn? Did that come naturally, or is that something where you're like, okay, I should hop on Coursera and like take a business analyst class 101 and like figure out what their goals are a bit more, or do you have any tips for that, I guess?
The less complicated you can make it, the better. There's obviously a lot of depth you can go into with UX, and with business analysis. There's all kinds of certifications and things. I can't speak to those. I'm not certified, but I've done business analysis work, and the ability for you to translate business needs and user needs into requirements that you have on cards that developers need to develop and that turn into tests. Like there's an art to it and there's a science to it, and making them really clear and understandable is also something that is really important. I think the last thing that people want is just a screenshot or an image of something and say, build this. And you might have been put in that circumstance already. I know most people have.
I ask a lot of questions.
That's number one. That's the best advice I could give is ask as many questions as you can. Make sure you're going through the what if scenarios. A lot of people design or talk about things in the perfect case scenario, but what happens when something doesn't work or a user decides to do something outside of what we thought they would do?
So some of your examples when you were talking about one UX designer working across multiple teams make it really sound like it is a challenge for the UX designer to really be on top of what each of the team's needs are and each of the team's users' needs are. Is that really am I understanding that correctly, or is that really the case, or is it not as overwhelming as it sounds?
It can be really fun. I will say that. Like for me, Well, I'll say it's really fun when you're talking about the same type of user or the same user base. Like when you have three teams that are working on the same or similar parts of the product, to where you're just deepening your knowledge of the product and the user experience as a whole by being in these different teams, and you're even able to share components and best practices. Say, hey, this team built this, you should build this, or I designed this once and I can give that thing to three different teams. I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And so it becomes like a scalable thing, which is really awesome for building a design system when it gets to scale, or when it comes to having a support structure within the development where you don't need as many developers to support a product because it's built the same, or they're using shared components. So there's a lot of actual value that can be had with that approach. It becomes really challenging if they're different users, or if someone needs more specific focus on one product and it's really high complexity. It can be really challenging. I'm not gonna say it's easy, but it can be a lot of fun too.
Thank you.
Awesome. This is some great discussion. Anybody have any other questions for Adam?
Shameless plug. We're hiring, so tell your friends. If you know any good UX folks or developer folks, feel free to connect with myself or whomever, and let us know. We're looking for really good people, as I'm sure are probably a lot of your organizations. But I just thought I'd throw a shameless plug out there.
Actually, I have a question for Adam. It's Emily up there from Montreal. Hello, folks.
Hey, Emily.
I'm pretty new as a manager, client, and user experience in a huge international company. I'm wondering, as a junior in UX, it's difficult to, raise the credibility in this field when you're new. So how do you have tips for me?
Yeah. The biggest one would be using other people's voice is your best asset. So if you can get user feedback and say, I'm not saying this, somewhat like this is what actual people are telling us, whether that's analytics, whether that's surveys, whether that's usability testing, having those data points and quotes, all of those types of things, the sound bites that you get, those are your biggest asset, because it's not you versus them, you're just telling them what other people said. And sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
But also I would say that coming from if I remember back when I was starting, one of the things that propelled me or gave me credibility was I worked my butt off to try to be the smartest person in the room. So I tried to understand their business. I tried to understand their competitors. I tried to understand the research. So when I walked into a room and I was trying to make recommendations or share something, it wasn't just me making this, but it was saying, your competitor's doing this, they're seeing success here, and our users are saying this. So you're able to wrap a more full package around the story.
Yeah, so deep down around the insights from outside of the company and inside the company. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And be brave. Like
Yay!
it's tough.
It's tough,
is
yeah.
tough. But do your homework. Be confident when you go in there that you're sharing facts and not opinions, and trust that they'll do the right thing, or that you can at least move the needle the right direction.
Yeah. Great advice, Adam. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, very, very excited to announce that IXT Triangle is officially an international meetup group. Cool. Well, thank you all for joining us. I think this was great, and the conversation was excellent. I hope we have some more of this soon. I'll be posting the recording somewhere soon after this. I still have to figure out exactly how and where that will go, because it's within our internal team's situation. But I'll publish the link somewhere when I can. If you need it urgently, please reach out and let me know. Also, if you have any questions about insights hiring, speaking with IXDA, ideas for the meetup group, any questions about UX or Agile and enterprise in general, you can reach out through the meetup group, and I can either forward it on to Adam, or one of us that manage the group will handle it as well. So yeah, if David or Adam, you guys have anything else to add on?
Adam already covered my shameless plug, so.
Okay.
Thanks
All
for
right,
having
cool.
us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate it again, Adam. And thank you all for joining us. And if we don't talk to you before then, have a happy holidays and a good New Year's, and we'll probably see you in some events in 2022.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy
All
holidays.
right.
Thanks, Adam.
Happy
Take care, everybody.